Feel the heavy, metallic pulse of a world driven by ambition, power, and the constant search for ultimate justice. We bring you the raw intensity of the human experience through a sharp, 3D cinematic lens of modern storytelling. Subscribe now and keep your finger on the pulse of the action.
She showed me her wrist on a Tuesday morning, and I still can't tell you exactly what happened inside my chest when she did. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something quieter and colder than that. The way the temperature drops right before a bad storm rolls in off Lake Ontario. I'd been up since 5. That's what happens when you're 63 and your knees don't let you sleep past dawn anymore. I was at the kitchen table with my second coffee, going through nothing in particular. Flyers mostly, the kind of junk mail that keeps coming even when you've asked them to stop, when I heard her key in the lock. My daughter doesn't just drop by at 7:30 on a Tuesday. That was the first thing I noticed. The second thing was her jacket. It was August. She was wearing a long-sleeve denim jacket in the middle of August in Barrie, and it was already 22 degrees outside. Her name is Claire. She's 31 years old. She has her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness. And she married a man named Trevor 4 years ago, in a small ceremony at a vineyard just outside Niagara-on-the-Lake. I walked her down the aisle. I danced with her to a song she'd loved since she was 8. I shook Trevor's hand at the reception, and I told him, quietly, that she was the best thing I'd ever done with my life. I meant it as a welcome. I realize now he may have heard it as a warning. She sat down across from me at the table without saying anything. She poured herself coffee from the pot I'd left on the burner, wrapped both hands around the mug, and stared at it. I waited. 31 years of knowing her, I've learned that Claire comes to things in her own time. You can't pull it out of her. You have to let her get there herself. She said, "I need to show you something, Dad." She pushed the sleeve of the jacket up to her elbow. There were 3 of them. Circular. About the size of a loonie, each one. The skin had gone that particular yellowish purple. That means they weren't fresh. Maybe 5-6 days old. They were positioned on the soft inside of her forearm, evenly spaced, deliberate. The kind of marks that don't happen by accident. The kind of marks that someone makes when they're holding on too hard, when they want you to feel it for days afterwards so you don't forget. I looked at them for a long time. I set my coffee cup down very carefully so I wouldn't break it. "How long?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. She pulled her sleeve back down. Slowly, like she was covering up something shameful. And I hated that she'd learned to feel ashamed of it. That somewhere along the way the shame had transferred from him to her, which is exactly what that kind of man wants. A while, she said, "Claire, 2 years maybe, on and off." 2 years. My daughter had been living with this for 2 years. She'd sat at this same table at Christmas, at Thanksgiving, at her nephew's birthday party last spring, and she'd sat here with her sleeves down and her smile up, and I hadn't known. I want to be honest about that. I didn't know. And that's something I've had to sit with. I spent 26 years as a private investigator in this city. Before that, 8 years with the OPP. Before my back injury ended that chapter. I have made a living, a decent one, out of noticing things other people miss. I noticed when clients were lying to me. I noticed when the person they'd hired me to investigate was being watched by someone else. I notice exits in every room I enter, by habit. Even now, I did not notice that my son-in-law was hurting my daughter. She told me later that she'd worked very hard to make sure I wouldn't. She said she'd become an expert at it, timing her visits for when the marks had faded, laughing a little louder than usual so I wouldn't ask questions, telling me Trevor sent his regards when he hadn't even asked where she was going. I believe her. I've seen enough cases in my career to know exactly how that works, how a person can be systematically trained, over months and years, to manage the perceptions of everyone around them. It's not weakness. It's survival. But knowing that intellectually and feeling it in your chest when it's your own daughter are 2 entirely different things. She told me about the first time. They'd been married 8 months. They'd had an argument about money. She'd bought something he thought was unnecessary, a small thing, a lamp she loved, and he'd grabbed her upper arm and squeezed until she cried. Then he'd apologized, taken her to dinner, told her he didn't know what came over him, that he'd been under tremendous pressure at work, that he would never do it again. He did it again 6 weeks later. By the end of the first year, she said, she'd started to understand the pattern. She could feel it building sometimes, days in advance, a particular silence he had, a way of not answering when she spoke, a stillness that meant something was being stored up. She learned to walk quietly, to not ask questions at certain hours, to have dinner ready before he asked for it. I knew it wasn't right, she said. I knew that the whole time. I want you to know I knew. I know you knew, I said. I just kept thinking it would get better. That I could, I don't know, fix it somehow, if I was just a little more careful. I'd heard those exact words before. In my work, I'd heard them dozens of times. They never got easier to hear. She had a son. His name is Liam, and he's 2 years old, and he has Trevor's dark hair and Claire's laugh. And he is the reason she finally came to me that Tuesday morning. Not the bruises. She'd endured the bruises. What she couldn't endure was the night 3 weeks earlier when she'd been holding Liam in the kitchen, and Trevor had come in angry about something. She couldn't even remember what, and had slammed his hand on the counter so hard the dishes rattled and Liam had started crying, and she had turned her body to put herself between her son and her husband, instinctively, without thinking. She said she'd stood there for a long moment after, rocking Liam, and something had clarified inside her, like a window being wiped clean. I'm not protecting myself very well, she said, but I'm not going to stop protecting him. I got up from the table and went to stand at the kitchen window for a minute, not because I needed to think, because I needed 30 seconds to get my face under control before I turned around. I'd been semi-retired for 2 years, took occasional cases, mostly referrals, nothing I needed to hustle for. I had time, I had resources, I had 26 years of contacts in this city and the surrounding region, people who owed me favors, people I'd helped, people who trusted me, and I had in the bottom drawer of my office desk my old investigative files from cases I'd worked that were similar to this one. Not identical. Every situation is its own thing, but similar enough that I knew the shape of what I was dealing with. I turned around. Don't go home today, I said. Dad, I'm not asking you to do anything yet. I'm just asking you not to go home today. Stay here. Tell him you're spending time with me. That's true. She looked at me for a long moment. What are you going to do? I'm going to make some coffee, I said, and then I'm going to make some calls. Trevor worked in commercial real estate. He was good at it, apparently. I wouldn't know because I'd never had much use for the particular kind of charm that gets you into boardrooms. He was 35, fit, the kind of man who kept his car very clean and wore the right kind of watch. He'd grown up in Mississauga, came from a family I didn't know anything about, and had moved to Barrie 6 years ago for work. That was what I knew about him from ordinary life. What I knew about him from the 2 days I spent going through everything I could find was considerably more. He'd had a previous relationship before Claire. A woman named Andrea lived in Oakville now. They'd been together 3 years, lived together for the last one, and had separated according to what I could piece together, abruptly, with her moving out while he was at work and not leaving a forwarding address. That pattern. I know that pattern. I reached out through contact at a firm I'd worked with in Oakville. Discreetly. I wasn't looking to make accusations. I was looking to understand who I was dealing with. I also pulled the property records on the house. The house was in Trevor's name only. Claire had moved into it after they married. Her name was on nothing. That was something I should have noticed 4 years ago, and I hadn't. On the third day, while Claire was upstairs with Liam, I went into my office, closed the door, and sat down at my desk. I opened the bottom drawer. I still had my old case recorder, the handheld one I'd used for years before everything went digital. I had my documentation templates. I had the contact information for a family lawyer I'd worked with for 15 years, a woman in Aurelia who was as sharp as anyone I'd ever met in this field. I had the number for a victim services coordinator at the Barrie Police Service, someone I'd collaborated with on several cases, who I knew to be both competent and discreet. I also had, in the back of the drawer, a folded piece of paper that I'd carried for a long time, It was a note from a woman I'd helped 12 years ago, a mother of two who'd been in a situation not unlike Claire's. She'd written it to me after everything was resolved, after she and her kids were settled somewhere safe and her ex-husband was facing charges. The note said, simply, "Thank you for believing me before I believed myself." I read it, the way I sometimes do when I need to remember why any of this matters, and then I put it back. And then I picked up the phone. The lawyer's name is Patricia. She doesn't take on many new clients these days. She's selective, which is a polite way of saying she's earned the right to be. But she'd worked with me before and she knew my judgment. I told her the situation in broad strokes. She asked several precise, useful questions. By the end of the call, she had agreed to meet with Claire the following week, and she had given me a list of things I should start documenting immediately. The victim services coordinator, I'll call her by her first name, Ruth, which is what she'd always told me to call her, was the second call. Ruth had a way of cutting through complicated situations to the practical center of them, which I'd always respected. She walked me through the current process, the options available to Claire, the likely timeline for a protection order application, the supports that would be in place. Does she want to pursue this? Ruth asked me. She came to me, I said. She showed me the marks. She didn't have to do either of those things. That's not the same as wanting to pursue it. No, I said. It's not. But it's the beginning of it. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Bring her in when she's ready, not before. These things can't be rushed and they can't be forced, you know that. I did know that. 26 years had taught me that. What 26 years had not quite prepared me for was the particular difficulty of applying professional patience to your own family. That evening, I made dinner. Nothing complicated, just a chicken and vegetable soup, because it was what my mother used to make when things were hard, and some habits persist. Liam ate half a bowl, and then fell asleep against Claire's arm at the table, and I watched the two of them, my daughter and her son, the last of the light coming through the kitchen window, and I thought, this is what I'm working with. This is what I'm working for. Claire looked up and caught me looking. I know that expression, she said. What expression? The one that means you've already made 17 phone calls and you have a plan. 3 calls, I said. And it's not a plan yet. It's the beginning of a plan. She smiled, and it was the first real smile I'd seen from her in I don't know how long. Too long. Tell me, she said. So I told her. Not everything. Some of it she didn't need to know yet, but enough. I told her about Patricia and the meeting. I told her about Ruth and what Ruth had said about the protection order process. I told her that her name wasn't on the house and that we needed to address that. And I told her that I needed her to write things down. Dates, times, details of what had happened, whatever she remembered. Not for me, for the record, for Patricia. Because the clearer and more precise her account, the stronger her position. She was quiet for a while after I finished. He's going to be angry, she said. Yes. He's going to say I'm taking Liam away from him. He may say that. That doesn't make it true. And it doesn't change what you need to do. I'm scared, Dad. I know, that's reasonable. You should be, not because you're doing something wrong, but because this is genuinely hard, and anyone who tells you it isn't is either lying or hasn't done it. I paused. Being scared doesn't mean you stop. It means you make sure you're not doing it alone. She looked at her son, asleep against her arm. Okay, she said quietly. Over the next 2 weeks, Claire stayed with me. She told Trevor she needed some time, that she was struggling, that she needed space to think. He called. He texted. The messages started out measured and reasonable, the kind of carefully worded things that a careful man produces when he knows they might be read by others later. Then they became less measured. Then came a message that I will not quote in full, but which Ruth later described, when I forwarded it to her at Claire's request, as useful documentation. Patricia met with Claire for 2 hours on a Thursday afternoon. I drove them and waited in the parking lot. When they came out, Patricia caught my eye over Claire's shoulder and gave me a small, precise nod. Good. We were on the right track. I'd also, by this point, spoken to Andrea in Oakville. Not to pressure her into anything, not to ask for anything she didn't want to give. Just a conversation. She'd been cautious at first, understandably so. And then, once she understood who I was and why I was calling, less so. She didn't tell me anything she hadn't already processed a long time ago, but she confirmed enough that I understood clearly. Trevor had a history. It was a pattern, not an incident. She asked about Claire. I told her Claire was safe and that she had support. Andrea was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I left without telling anyone. I just disappeared. I've always wondered if that was the wrong choice. You made the choice that kept you safe, I said. That was the right choice. I hope she gets more than I got, Andrea said. We're working on that, I said. The protection order was granted on a Monday afternoon, 3 weeks after Claire showed up at my door with her sleeve pushed up to her elbow. I was in the courthouse with her. Patricia was there. Ruth had arranged for a support worker to be present as well. We sat in a small waiting room that smelled of floor cleaner and old coffee, and Claire held Liam in her lap. And I sat beside her, and we waited. When it was done, we walked out into the September air. It was cooler now, that first real hint of fall that you get in the last weeks of September in this part of Ontario, the air carrying a sharpness that wasn't there the week before. Claire stopped on the courthouse steps and tipped her face up toward the sky for a moment. Her eyes closed. Liam pointed at a pigeon on the railing and said something that might have been bird and might have been something else entirely. And Claire laughed. That full, real laugh, not the careful one she'd been wearing for years. And I had to look away for a moment, past the parking lot, toward the tree line. Trevor was served that afternoon. He retained a lawyer by the end of the day. That was expected. Patricia had told us to expect it, had told us exactly what would likely happen in what order, and she'd been right about all of it so far, which was why I trusted her. His lawyer made noise, as lawyers do. Accused Claire of fabricating, of exaggerating, of using the legal system as leverage in a family dispute. Patricia handled it with the same precise calm she applied to everything, and the noise remained exactly what it was. Noise. Over the following weeks, the documentation Claire had prepared, the record she'd kept, the photographs of the marks from that August morning, which I'd insisted she take before they faded, the messages he'd sent, the account from Andrea, which had been prepared carefully and independently, built into something solid. Not a single large thing. A series of small, documented, verifiable things assembled in order. This is how these cases actually work, in my experience. Not through dramatic confrontations, not through one definitive moment of exposure. Through the slow, careful accumulation of evidence by people who take the work seriously. Patricia took it seriously. Ruth took it seriously. Claire, who had more to lose than any of us and more reason to be afraid, took it seriously. In November, Trevor was charged with assault causing bodily harm. The charge related specifically to the marks on Claire's arm and a separate incident she had documented from 14 months prior, an incident involving a bruised rib she told her doctor she'd gotten from a fall, which her doctor had noted at the time as inconsistent with the reported mechanism of injury. That medical record had been in a file somewhere for over a year. Now, it was part of a case. He entered a guilty plea in February, on the advice of his own lawyer, to a reduced charge. He received a conditional sentence, house arrest, counseling requirements, a permanent restraining order, and he lost his license to practice as a registered broker in Ontario. Was it enough? I don't know how to answer that. I know what I wanted. I know what justice would have looked like to me in the abstract. I also know that what actually mattered, what Claire needed, was for it to be over, for her and Liam to be safe, and for Trevor to no longer have legal access to either of them. Those things happened. Claire and Liam are still in Barrie. She moved into a rental about 10 minutes from my house, and she's working part-time again now, at a dental office she likes. On Sunday afternoons, she and Liam come over, and I make soup or something on the grill depending on the season, and Liam runs around the backyard and points at birds, and falls down on the grass and gets up again with the absolute equanimity that 2-year-olds bring to falling down. I watch him sometimes and think about the version of his life in which Claire stayed, in which nothing changed. I let myself think about it for exactly as long as I can stand, and then I stop. There's something I want to say about the morning she showed me her arm, because I've thought about it many times since. When she pushed that sleeve up, she wasn't asking me to fix it. I understand that now in a way I didn't immediately at the time. She wasn't handing me a problem to solve. She was doing something much harder than that. She was deciding, for the first time, to let someone else know the truth. To stop managing the secret alone. The action she needed from me in that moment wasn't a plan, wasn't a series of phone calls, wasn't the deployment of 26 years of professional contacts. It was to look at her arm and not look away. Everything else came after that. I'm not going to tell you that I handled all of it perfectly. I'm not going to tell you that I never said the wrong thing, or that I never felt the urge to move faster than she was ready to move, or that there weren't nights when I sat in my office with the lights off trying to contain something that didn't want to be contained. There were plenty of those nights. But I kept showing up. At the kitchen table at 7:30 in the morning. In the parking lot outside Patricia's office. On the courthouse steps in September with the pigeons and the cool air. That's all I had, showing up. It turned out to be enough. She asked me once, a few months after everything was resolved, whether I'd been angry. We were washing dishes after dinner, Liam asleep in the back room, and she asked it in that careful way she has, like she was checking whether the answer would upset her. Yes, I said. At him? At him. At the situation. At myself. For a while. She was quiet for a moment. For not knowing? Yes. I didn't want you to know, she said. I worked very hard to make sure you didn't. I know that. So it wasn't your fault. I know that too, I said. Knowing something and feeling it are different. She handed me a bowl to dry. We stood there for a minute, the ordinary sound of water and dishes, the light over the sink. I'm glad I came to you, she said. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. I put the bowl in the cupboard where it belonged. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any religious sense. I'm not a man who leans on that kind of framework. But in the plain, observable way that 26 years of investigative work teaches you, actions compound. The small ones most of all. Trevor made a choice early in that marriage to use fear as a tool. Maybe he learned it somewhere. Maybe it came naturally to him, which is its own kind of sad. But every time he grabbed Claire's arm and she didn't leave, he learned something. Every time she covered it up and smiled through dinner and managed everyone's perception so carefully, he learned something. What he learned, over and over, was that there were no consequences. And a man who learns there are no consequences does not stop. He expands. That's not a moral judgment. That's just how it works. What I've also thought about is Claire's choice, the one she made on a Tuesday morning in August when she drove to my house and sat down at my kitchen table. She didn't have to do that. She'd spent 2 years not doing it. She could have kept going, kept managing, kept protecting the version of her life that looked fine from the outside. A lot of people do. I don't say that critically. I say it because I understand now, more than I did before, how much it costs a person to finally stop pretending. It took intelligence to do what she did, not the kind you get from a textbook, the kind that comes from finally seeing a situation clearly enough to know that what you've been doing isn't working and isn't going to work. She had to be honest with herself before she could be honest with me. That honesty, I think, was the hardest part of the whole thing. Harder than the courthouse. Harder than any of it. And then it took something else. Stubbornness, maybe. Or what I'd call a quieter kind of courage. Not the dramatic kind that announces itself, but the kind that just keeps putting one foot in front of the other when everything in you wants to stop. She wrote down dates and times when she was scared. She sat in Patricia's office and said hard things out loud. She stayed. I want to say something about what I contributed, and I want to be accurate about it. I brought professional knowledge, and I brought contacts, and I brought the particular patience that comes from having done difficult work for a long time. Those things mattered. But none of them were the reason this ended the way it did. The reason it ended the way it did is that Claire came to my door. Everything that followed was downstream of that one decision. Her decision, not mine. I've worked cases where the person at the center wasn't ready, where the support was there and the resources were there and nothing moved because the person wasn't at the place yet where they could receive it. There's no shortcut to that place. Nobody can carry you there. You have to get there yourself. Liam is 3 now. He has no memory of any of this, which is as it should be. He runs around Claire's backyard on Sunday afternoons and falls down and gets back up and points at things with great authority, and the life he is growing up inside is a calm one. That's what this was all for. Not the legal outcome, not the charges, not any of it. A calm life for 2 people who deserve one. That's enough. That has always been enough.